Welcome to Watch Symposium. I'm Austin. Are watches investments? Well, Morgan Stanley must think so because they have just released their quarterly report on the state of the secondhand watch market. In their assessment, they look at 3 data points. They look at the supply, how many pieces are out there, the absorption rate, how many pieces are put on the market versus how many are purchased. And they also look at the age of the watches in terms of how long they've sat on the shelves. Not really the age of the watches, but the age of the listings. Now, just to catch everybody up, the peak of the market was in May of 2022, and since then it has gone down. And in this quarter, it's gone down even more, all right? We are at minus 0.9% across the board when you're talking all of the brands together. Now, compared to last quarter, Rolex is doing better. And this chart is a little bit deceptive because all it's doing is comparing last quarter with this quarter. They're still going down, but their rate of decline isn't as great as these other companies. Their rate of decline has been somewhat arrested. It's going down, but compared to last quarter, they're doing 0.4% better. These other brands, on the other hand, were doing badly, and now they're doing even worse. Richemont is particularly notable. Now, the funny thing about Richemont is within the Richemont brand, they have Cartier. 42% of their sales comes from Cartier, and that's their cash cow. In fact, Cartier is doing even better than Rolex, but it's their other brands, IWC, Vacheron, Jaeger-LeCoultre, that are the real toxic sludge that's even pulling down their Cartier pieces. Rolex is down 0.5%, and compared to last year at this time, it's down 3.6%. Now, of course, we're just looking at the brand as a whole, and unless you have one of every model, it's probably not that useful. It's better to look at the specific models and how they're faring. Now, Rolex prices are still going down, but again, compared to last quarter, they're not going down as much. They're only down 5%. So things have gotten better by about 4%. And I'm going to read a quote from the report. And if you want to read the report yourself, I'm going to make the report available for my members. If you haven't joined yet, link in the description how you can do that. But this explains why things are better this quarter compared to last quarter. And if you take away nothing from this video, at least remember this because I think it's worth thinking about. Rolex prices were down 0.5% as weaker performance from modern sports models was offset by vintage and classic references. That's right, the modern sports pieces, the Daytona, the GMT, the Sub, they didn't fare well. But what made things a little less bad when it comes to Rolex across the board were the vintage models. That's right, the 4 digits, the 5 digits. I know I see a lot of people buy those. And in addition to that, what they call the classic references, the Datejust and the day date. Now, these classic references compared to last quarter are actually up. The day date is up by 0.8% and the Datejust is up by 1.1%. So while things are going down across the board and are bad, they're not as bad compared to last quarter because of Datejusts and day dates, the modern ones, and vintage pieces, vintage and neo-vintage pieces. Those are helping the market. Those are, well, better investments according to the data. Now again, this is talking about the price trends on the secondhand market, and retail is a whole nother thing. I mean, 68% of Rolexes are going above retail, 68% of APs are going above retail, and 40% of Pateks are going above retail. Okay, the takeaway there is if your grandmother that knows nothing about watches except for just the brand is heading to the store and says, "Can I pick you up anything?" Ask for an AP or a Rolex, because the chances are she's going to get one that is selling above retail in the secondhand market. What I want you to keep in mind is that just because the modern Datejust and modern day date is going more this quarter versus last quarter, that doesn't mean that if you're at an authorized dealer and you're looking at a Daytona and a Datejust and you can buy either, that you should go for the Datejust. No, go for the Daytona, because of course the Daytona prices and the GMT prices and the sub prices shot up, and so there's more room for them to come down. It just makes sense that those sky high prices are getting more reasonable. And speaking of the modern professional Rolex watches that are most to blame for the contraction these past quarters, this quarter included, the most guilty, the Rolex Daytona, which is down from last quarter 2.8%. The GMT Master 2 is down 1.5%. Where and when did I get this? Well, members know. There's a members video that covers this watch. All right, and the sub, which is down 1.1%. Of course, this makes complete sense because the prices were higher on those pieces and there's more room for decline. Less so with the Datejust and the day dates. Again, if you're at an authorized dealer and you still want to get those models. But if you bought, for example, a Daytona a couple of months ago, well, you're more in the red now than you were. And if about 6 months ago you bought a day date or a Datejust, you actually might be in the green. So are things turning around? Well, Morgan Stanley doesn't seem to think so, and I don't either. Now, talking about the three metrics they used, look at this chart. It illustrates supply. Supply is going up, and I can see this when I go to Nakano, because last time I went, there weren't so many 16710 pre-ceramic GMTs, but there were quite a few modern GMTs. So supply of the modern pieces seems to be increasing. Look at this graph, absorption rate, that's the second data point. So more pieces are coming onto the market than are being purchased. And this graph shows how long the pieces are sitting on the shelves, and they seem to be sitting longer and longer on the shelves. Now, I'd love to hear your interpretation of the data and more specifically your prediction on the future of the Rolex market. But Morgan Stanley doesn't feel like we've yet hit an inflection point. The decline in prices has been arrested somewhat. Thank you, vintage, neo-vintage, Datejusts, and day dates for that. But they think it's going to contract further. We're not going to start seeing prices increase. And I don't think we are either, because when it comes to these modern pieces, they just keep making them. And there's another factory on the way. So I can't see the modern pieces doing anything more than continuing to go down. And if you're looking to get a retail piece at an authorized dealer, this is good news. If you bought in 2022 thinking this is money in the bank, Rolex blue chip stock, I'm going to sell in 2024 for a profit, well, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I'm going to leave you with this, and let me just quote this again because I think it's so important. Rolex prices were down 0.5% as weaker performance from modern sports models was offset by vintage and classic references. Well, the vintage, that's really what I want to focus on. And vintage, neo-vintage, they're talking about those watches. And I've always said there's a limited number of 16710s out there. There's a limited number of 14060s, 14060Ms. The 16610 dates up, although there are quite a few more of those than the other references. We know that thanks to the Rolex book. Link in the description to this video if you haven't seen that. But my point is that there is a finite number of these watches, and so I think that accounts for them being more stable and a better, quote, investment if you want to look at it that way. So if you're looking to get into watches and you just don't want your, quote, investment, the money you put into your watches, to go down, don't be buying modern Daytonas and modern GMTs. If you can get them retail, snap them up. But if you're going to be paying gray market prices for anything, it makes more sense to do so for the discontinued vintage and neo-vintage pieces. And that's what I see. That's why people come to Japan and they commission me to help them buy a 16710, for instance. And, well, those are the models that are, I guess, keeping things from being worse than they are. So let me know what you think. Take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.